Hello and welcome to Mann's Model Moments. Well, it's been a busy start to 2025 from a modelling perspective already, with ICM, mini-art and Airfix announcements for the coming year already having dropped. Some Tamiya and Revell news is also dropping, but before we get to those it's time to look to the Mediterranean and Italeri. They've released their 2025 preview PDF, which I'll link below in the video description so you can check it out yourselves if you wish. Now the images I'm using here are taken from that catalogue, so my apologies if some of them are rather low resolution. As always, let's start with the good stuff and brand new tools. The first model we have here is the Mackie MC200. Now this might look rather familiar since it was in their range announcement for 2024, but obviously that didn't happen and it slipped into 2025. Bear that in mind because it's going to come up again before the end of this video. If you like guessing games, pause the video now and write in the comments below just how many times you think it will, and I'll summarise them at the end. So the MC200 is the radial engine predecessor to the more attractive, to my eye at least, inline engine versions of the airframe released in the 202 and 205. The 205 Veltro was of course a big release in 2023, and I imagine the experience gained in that model will be used here, which also makes the delays a little harder to understand. When I saw the image of the MC202 Folgore, I initially thought they were going to fill in the gap between the delayed 200 and 2023's 205, but then I realised this was not in 1/32nd scale, but in 1/48th. Now this does make some sense when you think how much more accessible 1/48 scale is compared to 1/32nd, and it has only been tooled twice before in this scale, the most accessible one being Hasegawa's 1995 version. As such, I think this should be a pretty good release for them, and just like some of the British subjects for Airfix, who better to release a Folgore than Italeri? Definitely one I'll consider if it indeed does arrive in 2025. The next entry doesn't really make as much sense to me however, and I know a lot of people will be groaning here about not another F-35, but my query over it isn't based on the subject per se. This is the F-15 and F-16 of its generation combined after all, and it will be around for a long time to come. Now obviously Italeri started off releasing their brand new tooled F-35B in 1/48 scale in 2022, 10 years after Kitty Hawk's model in 2012, and quickly it became a kit that was highly praised at the time and adopted by Tamiya to put in its own box, which says a lot about it. Tamiya then followed up with their own tooled 1/48 scale F-35A, competing against the existing Mann model F-35A, and it was quickly hailed as the definitive kit of the subject in the scale. So why would Italeri come out 3 years later and compete directly with Tamiya, and potentially Hobby Boss as well? I'm not sure Italeri can put enough distance from Tamiya in price whilst maintaining that sort of detail and build quality to pull a lot of sway from modelers here, so it's a little bit odd for me this one. They had announced the F-35C in this scale last year, which hasn't happened, and have thought that the carrier-borne version was different enough to add to the existing possibilities here, but the A version is the most vanilla of them all, and I don't see people flocking to buy an Italeri kit instead of a Tamiya one just to save a tenner. Yes, it is in beast mode, but are a few pylons and some bombs going to really swing that balance? So coming down to earth with a bump, we then get into Iteleri's 1/24th range of vehicles, and the trucks that they've built a solid base of over the years. This time we have the brand new Iveco Stralis S-Way, which, hang on a minute, they announced this one last year too! So it looks exactly as it did in the release last year, so this seems to have been a direct delay on the tool release from 2024 to 2025, so there's not much more to say on this one. Let's move on. Still in 1/24 scale is another Lancia rally car to follow along from the 1/12 scale Lancia Stratos that arrived just at the end of last year. If you're wondering what that Stratos looked like, I'll have an unboxing video for you very shortly, so keep your eyes peeled for that one. In fact, it might be worth a subscription and clicking on the notification bell for. Anyway, this is the Lancia Fulvia HF, a much earlier and, again to my eye, uglier, albeit very successful stablemate to the Stratos. This car dominated the Italian rally competitions from the mid-1960s to the mid-1970s, and I'm sure there will be both car and rally enthusiasts who would be pleased to see this one turn up. It's not a car I'm terribly familiar with, or that does anything for me really, but that's not to say that Italeri won't do a good job with it and please those out there that love it. We then go to the smallest scale to see a new vehicle tooling this year, and 1/35th scale, for the beautifully camouflaged semovente that also appeared in last year's announcements. Interestingly, last year it was shown as a kit with new parts, but this year it's been touted as having new moulds. Whether that means there were issues with integrating whatever base they planned to use here, or just decided to have this vehicle as a master for other variants, I'm not sure, but it does take our total of resurfacing delayed new tools from 2024 to 3. Which is actually more than the number of new tools Italeri managed to release last year. Interestingly though, it was described as having gluable rubber tracks in 2024, whereas now it's touting length and link. I'm not going to say more about these tardy kits. If you're interested on my thoughts on them the first time, then feel free to check out last year's video. I'll link it here and in the video description below. So let's go on from the not so new tools to kits with new parts. Starting off in big old 1/12 scale here, we have another iteration of their 1/12 scale Bugatti Type 35B, first released in 2022. This one is a racing derivative from the late 1920s. I think this gives modelers interested in having one of these vehicles but displaying it with appropriate weathering a real opportunity here, and even on the preliminary box art the car does look substantially less showroom ready than their other releases of this kit. Depending on my experience with the Stratos, I might be tempted by this one. Next is the Volvo FH low roof, which, once again, was announced last year, although with a different kit number and CAD that looked quite a bit different. In fact, the announced kit 3962 was released last year in the form it was shown, but with the name of the Volvo FH Platt DAC. So I wonder whether the wrong name was assigned to this kit last year and Italeri inadvertently leaked development plans of the kit back then. As such, I'm guessing the new parts here are still new, so I can't really add one on for the delayed kits counter. Maybe we give them half a point instead. Anyway, this is another development of their Volvo FH truck, and Italeri do seem good at putting out lots of variants of these heavy movers, providing a lot of choice if these are up your alley. Not many mainstream manufacturers do trucks, so I do think Italeri deserves some kudos for this. Another change of scale to 1/35th now, and another semovente. This is an upgraded version of the 2022 release of the M42-75/34, though what exactly that means is not clear at the moment. My understanding is that the 2022 kit added new parts to the M40-7518 1973 tool, so maybe they've decided to refresh some of the originally tooled parts, given new parts were only a couple of years ago. I guess we'll have to wait and see. The last kit to have new parts announced for it is the 1/35th scale MAS torpedo boat, originally tooled in 2010. The original boat was a late production series version, and when reissued in 2021, the new parts were just a crew, whereas this represents a second series production vessel. I'm not really familiar with Italian MTBs, but as it's been a while since this massive kit saw space on model shop shelves, I'd say there will be a fair few modelers that see this as worth picking up, especially if you fancy a really big diorama scene. As we're done with new parts now, let's look at some prior kits returning with new decals. The only entry in larger scale aircraft here is the Fiat G91, with schemes for 3 separate air forces, German, Italian and Portuguese. This last version was released in 2007, but this is an old 1970s esky kit, so don't expect much from it. This is a delayed reissue from 2024 as well. We then start a slew of 1/72nd scale aircraft kits with the Night Fighter version of this CR-42 World War II biplane, a rather nice tooling from 2005. This will be its 7th outing in this scale, with the last one being in 2020. Sticking with World War II, we then have the Dornier DO-217 with Fritz X guided bombs. a much earlier kit which originally hails from the late 1970s with different parts added over the years. I've built this kit a few times and I don't mind it at all. Another German light bomber, the base tooling of the Ju-88 here comes from the early 1990s, and again I've built this in various guises, and it's probably a lot easier today with modern canopy masks. This particular variant is the A-17 torpedo bomber, first seen in 1994. The F-6F Hellcat tooling is again a little younger still, being tooled at the start of the 21st century and not making an appearance since 2011, so if you can't find one elsewhere, this is a good opportunity to get one with a nice fresh set of cartographed decals. We keep getting closer to the present with the later war toolings, this A26 being first tooled in 2005 as a K, but this A/B variant was released in 2008, and the last time it was on the roster was back in 2014 as the pure B version. Entering the Cold War, both for the aircraft and the original tooling, we then have the OA-4 Skyhawk, first released in 1983. This was again last released over 10 years ago in 2014, and it seems to be just coming in US schemes. We then jump ahead to just after the Cold War for a 1992 tool of the Mirage 2000 in French markings. This kit has been released a lot over the ensuing 30 odd years, most recently in a Revell box, so we'll have to see how they fared in that time. The later Gripen twin-seater was a millennial tool that has seen itself sold under the label of no less than 5 other manufacturers aside from Italeri, including Airfix, Revell and Tamiya, and last released as a 2-seater by Bielek in 2010. The KC-135 Stratotanker is probably the largest 1/72nd release of any manufacturer this year so far, but beware because this is actually an old 1992 AMT moulding, and these require more than a new decal sheet to make a decent job of, as I know from my build of the XB70 under an Italeri badge last year. The one saving grace of an Italeri boxing is that their plastic is much more workable than the original hard and brittle AMT styrene. Another reintroduction this year is the Scania 142H 6x2 canvas, and despite the different preliminary art, this is exactly the same kit number 672 as was shown to be returning in 2024, so add another one to the tardy list here. Another truck, but this one it's a new re-release for 2025, the Iveco Fiat 190 Cowboy, first tooled in 1984 and only released once since that date, so any truck enthusiasts that have been looking to pick one of these up don't have to scratch around second-hand stalls or pay that dreaded eBay tax, with the benefit of also getting decals that won't explode at the sign of a drop of water. Another 1980s tool in the slightly smaller 1/35th scale is the Chaff, which is a lovely looking little tank. This was released fairly recently in 2021, but that was with Korean War marking, so this is a little different. Boasting no less than 6 nation schemes, we then have the later and larger Patton tank, a venerable tool originally made by the company when it still had another E in its name. This has been boxed by just about everyone, so it's not really bringing too much in the way of novelty to the table here. Originating even before the Patton previously, this Sherman in wet configuration was first seen in 2010 and last seen 10 years ago. It's also been boxed by just about everyone, and I think the wet version was the one Tamiya released as a Red Army tank. Once again, not sure this is going to stand up against the very competitive AFV market in the 2020s with much more recent tools. We finish off the new decals batch with a Burger Tiger, based on the 1994 Tiger 1 tool with additional parts added in 1998. I've built the base kit and it's okay, but nothing special. Again, how it fares against modern competition is uncertain. Our last crop from Italeri are straight reissues without new schemes. The first aircraft is the Ju-188, which was a fantastic tool in 1973. It was okay when I started it in the 1990s, and I'm not sure about 35 years on from that. There aren't actually that many toolings of the 188 around though. Hasegawa are really the only competition for this, and they can be difficult to source in Europe. The next re-release is the F84, actually a 2000 tooling from Academy, last released by Italeri in 2012. Tamiya did their tooling just before the Academy one, and I think it was viewed as better, but I'm not sure what demand still remains for this aircraft, which is maybe why it was another delayed release from 2024. This next one, another helicopter, which seems to be my fate at the moment, is very welcome however, being the only mainstream injection moulded kit of the type, the Merlin. It would have been even nicer if they had actually released it last year because, yes, once again, this kit was announced in the 2024 release schedule. This was tooled in 2002 and last released in a Revell box in 2014, and finding them is a job Merlin the Wizard would find challenging. I get asked about this kit a lot in the shop, especially with my proximity to RNAS Yeovilton, so I'll definitely be getting a bunch of these and putting a pre-order on the web store as soon as I have a price. Now if only Airfix would re-release their 1/48 scale version, which was only released once in 2013 and hasn't been seen since, I think people would be very happy. Next up is the 1991 version of the 1990 flanker, supposedly to make it into a sea flanker, but this basically consists of some filleted canards and little else, and to make a decently accurate rendition you need some surgery and a lot of filler. Personally, I would avoid this kit, but maybe with the Ukraine war, Italeri are banking on people not buying Zvezda, but I don't think bringing this back in this form is an answer. Moving to vehicles, we have just two in 1/35 scale, the first being the SD KFC 10 with flak 30. The origins of this go back to the 1999 tool DMAG, with new parts in 2004 to make this kit. Considering the other players on the market, and having very recently built the ICM 2cm flak and seeing it now on their trucks, I'm not seeing a huge pull for this one either, but I guess that will depend on the pricing. A little more appealing is the Flak Panzer 38T Gepard. This is based on the chassis of the ancient 1973 38T, with parts added in 2008 to make this version. It's a funky, weird little vehicle, which makes it appealing to me, but again, pricing will determine if this is worth considering picking up today. Hobby Boss have one in their inventory, which is the 2008 TriStar kit, and Dragon also released one, so this is the oldest tooling of them all, but probably also one of the most easily available. Right at the end of their preview PDF, they also have 4 kits which have been specifically boxed for players of War Thunder, including some digitally refundable in-game codes in the box. I think this is a really good idea for engaging a new audience that is interested in military equipment, but has mainly been exposed to it through games. This gives them that reason for purchasing outside of just an isolated experience that they might be unfamiliar and uncomfortable with pursuing were the digital codes not included. This kind of thinking about what potential modelers of tomorrow are looking for is pretty savvy, and I hope other manufacturers take note that this works out for Italeri. So what do I make of Italeri's preview for this year? Well, on the one hand, it feels a little underwhelming considering we have 6 new tools, but 3 of those should have been with us last year. One of the kits with new parts was sort of supposed to be with us in 2024, and 4 of the reissues should have been as well. That leaves us with a grand total of 7.5 delayed kits out of a total of 32 overall, which is almost 25%. And that really does reduce the impact of this announcement. Now, of course, everyone experiences delays, but if we looked at Airfix as a comparator, only 1 of their January announcements slipped into 2025. The only other Western manufacturer with this sort of slippage rate is Revell, and I'll talk about them in a separate video. But they've not really been blazing a trail in recent years, so anything that makes you look like them isn't a great comparison. On the other hand, there are some really nice kits to look forward to here, like the Macchi's and Semoventes, and Italieri's continuation into the 1/12 and 1/24 scale civilian subjects is very welcome. The F-35A in 1/48 scale is one that I would have argued against in a commercial strategy meeting, and if delays have occurred because of switching last year's announced C to this A, then I think that's a commercially ridiculous move. I also have to wonder about the volume of output here as well. Even if Italeri put out all of these new tools, together with the 2 that came last year, that only makes 8 new toolings in 2 years. Less than most other mainstream or even rising manufacturers. The economics of Italeri will also play into this, because back in the 90s and the early noughties, I saw Italeri as one of my favourite companies, as they gave a wide range of interesting subjects with decent fit, detail and plastic quality for a very reasonable price. Now if you wanted a basic kit, they were good enough to build as is, or you could add resin, photo etch and the like to improve them without breaking the bank. Recent releases, however, have not been cheap, the 1/32 scale Veltro being a good example of that. Now if they're trying to become more high-end, that's absolutely fine, but then we see them pushing out old 1970s tools, often from legacy companies like AMT and Eschi, which just run completely counter to that image. You can't have a high-end and a budget basement feel to your brand at the same time without some sort of differential, like Waitrose Essentials in the food arena, for example. On that point, there are a few kits here that should have probably been left in the cupboard, that SU27K being one of them. If ever an old tool needed some new parts to really look like what it's supposed to be, that's the one. I'm not sure how good the Stratotanker or Eschi G91 are, maybe they're sought after, but I can guarantee the detail level in both of them won't satisfy someone paying a premium price for them. So overall, this feels like a bit of a strange preview. It's a bit like going to an old Italian restaurant you remember from your youth, only to find the prices have gone up and they have a menu that ranges from expensive nouvelle cuisine that leaves you hungry after eating it, to a big plate of basic spag bol with no cheese that you used to eat as a student, in a place that has new pictures hanging over the old familiar wallpaper. If I were going to give advice to Italeri, it would be threefold. Firstly, choose what you're trying to be to the community and build your business around that philosophy. Secondly, announce what you can do and then deliver on it. Disappointment is one of the biggest ways to kill enthusiasm. Lastly, price what you release to sell. Your business relies on selling kits, and selling 10 kits at 50% profit is better than selling 5 at 75. So those are my thoughts on the 2025 Italeri preview. What did you think? How do you think it compares to the other announcements we've heard so far? I'd love to hear what you think, so please do go ahead and add your 2 cents in the comments below. That's all for this instalment of Mann's Model Moments. If you enjoyed the video, please click the like button, subscribe to the channel for more like it, and share this video with others you think would also enjoy it. You can also follow me on Instagram, Twitter and Facebook, and if you're feeling generous, then I also have a Patreon, which is absolutely the best way of helping me to grow the channel and produce more content like this. With that, I hope you have plenty of modelling moments of your own, and I look forward to welcoming you on the next video.